Hi, Mark Pearson, Executive and Artistic Director of the College Light Opera Company, coming to you from upstage left at the Highfield Theater. Welcome to BackStage, a week in review of work being done by our talented design and production students. Let's see what they've been working on.
Kristen Knutson, Production Manager and Technical Director. This week, instead of focusing on just a scenic costume or props design, I asked the design and production team to dip their toes into the world of production design and think about a show as a whole. They've been asked to create a mood board for a particular show. So that's like a collage of inspiration, things that help specify the color palette, textures, shape, anything that helps to contribute to the world of the play through the costumes, sets, lights, props, everything. Think of it as a production Pinterest. These collages and presentations are intended to help convey to the viewer, whether it's an audience like you or a director for a show that they're working with, sort of the cohesive vision they have for how the entire production should look and feel. You're also going to see some short clips from their second workshop on portfolios and resumes. They had a chance to brush up their materials, and then some returning guests as well as some new faces formed a panel of professionals to give them feedback on their work.
For it. That's awesome. Something that I have on stage right
now. Thank you. It's I'd like to say I made all of it. I definitely constructed all of it. So the head is like a wig head with like a mask that I put over it that I painted. And then the body is, it's actually hollow. So it's a PVC pipe that's connected at an angle like that. With some elastic in it so that way the arms could move. And then the body is muslin that I fabric machéed. So I just covered it in glue and water and pinned it into the wrinkly places. And then I sprayed it with some floral spray.
Yeah, I think it's very successful. I'd like to see a picture of it in light and theater lighting.
Yeah, I think the fabric choice is a really good one for playing with the light. Because velvet has many highs and lows depending what light it's in.
Our paint shop, and some of them open so people can hide things inside of them and take them out, and then they are all standable as well, and they are all able to be moved by all the actors. So there was one for each actor.
And what did you give them in rehearsal to mimic this?
Yeah, these ones were kind of a fun struggle for us because they actually didn't come into the show until pretty much Tech Week, but we used rehearsal blocks so in the room, and there was plenty of them for them to use.
And then coming out the other side as the finished garment. Working closely with the designer to make sure that she was very particular and very detail oriented. So making sure that everything was done exactly in the way that she wanted.
The stretch fabric?
It is, yeah. It was very stretchy, which did make it a challenge to work with.
Yeah.
For sure.
Pleated it down in the cuffs and sewed the cuffs on through the machine. And then to get the and then closed the sleeves up through the machine. But to get the sleeves into the jacket, they're actually stuffed through the inside of the jacket and pulled out the armhole and then prick stitched on. So the whole thing is actually sewn, and then I hand sewed the zipper in as well.
Wow, that's impressive.
That was right.
Thank you.
I like
real newspaper, you said? Real newspaper?
Real newspaper. That's about, it's roughly a full Philadelphia Inquirer that she's wearing.
Wow.
Wow. How can we as like costume people present ourselves to be a production assistant? Because I know you do a lot of everything, and you're like, if I were to, I obviously can't have like my design resume. How can I curate what I've done so that it better fits?
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think you need to have a resume full of production assistant work. I think people will see the dates on your resume and, you just graduated, and people understand, that's how it is. Yeah, you were the costume designer in college, but now you're you want to, work professionally, and so this is your foot in the door.
Yeah.
And I think it's great to have all those things on your resume, like you were a classroom designer or whatever you did, because it shows, your versatility. And I think for production assistant, you can apply directly to a costume department. You won't necessarily be on like the production and doing, something you're not interested in.
Yeah. Okay. For this week's production mood board project, I chose Brigadoon. I chose this show because I really enjoyed the music, the story, and the setting. I have liked this show for many years, and when I thought of this show for this project, I liked the aesthetic that I immediately started to picture. I started with lots and lots of visual research, mostly from Pinterest, as well as some images from one of my favorite costume designers' websites. She had lots of really nice images of texture and fabric swatches. After paring down the number of images, I organized them into the collage. The colors that began to stand out in my research were gray, green, golden, and purple. The grays and greens were focused on the landscape, the rocks, mist, trees, and moss of the Scottish Highlands. The goldens and purples focused more on the clothing. They also intertwine nicely, the gray and green brought into the clothes to bring down the brightness of the golden yellow colors, and the golden and purple finding its way into the landscape with the brown grass, thistles, and heather. I wanted to bring the golden colors and the purple into the color palette to make it lighter and reflect the tone of the show, and remind the audience that this show, while having mysterious and mythical aspects, is a story about love and has a whimsy that I felt these colors complemented. Historical visual research is one of my favorite parts of designing a period piece, so this project was a lot of fun, and I really had to edit the number of pictures that made the final cut. Even though I made some tough decisions, I really like how the final images easily fit together and communicate my vision and aesthetic idea for this hypothetical production of Brigadoon.
Hi everyone, my name is Katie Moran, and for this week's mood board project, I decided to create a mood board for the show A Midsummer's Night Dream by William Shakespeare. So I'm just gonna show you my mood boards that I've made for this aesthetic that I wanted to create for the show, and then I'll go through and talk about some details that I wanted to include into it. So when I picked the show, I immediately began to think of how most of the show takes place in the woods, and I thought that it needed to be very fantasy-like. I didn't want this to feel like a normal wood. I didn't want it to feel like a set that you would see for Into the Woods or something like that. I wanted to really focus in on that word dream in the title of the show, and I think that the aesthetic that I kind of created with my mood boards really gets that point across. So let's get right on into it. So first, here is my mood board for the set. These pictures all represent things that I would want to be included in the set design. There's some colors and different ways that I would want the set to feel. I really wanted it to be that sort of flourished woods with lots of green, and it's all very lush, but very, not packed, but very full. What I really want to convey with this set is that this is the woods. You never know where things are coming from. You never know where people are gonna go. So I wanted there to be plenty of inspiration to make the set very versatile for people to enter and exit through in different creative ways. So first you'll see these staircases, and they're very overgrown, they're very natural, they look like the woods made them themselves basically from years of people being in the woods. And then I like this idea of having sort of hollows in the trees, little places for people to hide or sleep when that's needed in the story. I also like the idea of them being kind of blended in with the trees, so it's not very clear that people are there, but once someone discovers that that's a place to go into, that's when it can be used throughout the whole show. In the show, we also have characters that are human or not human, so basically the humans and the fairies. For the fairies, I wanted them to have more abstract ways to enter or exit scenes. So I was inspired by seeing these mushrooms on the trees to make some form of staircase for them to use. These would only be used by the fairies. And I would want some of these to be big enough to sit on or lounge on to listen to Titania and Oberon while they're speaking. This would be great playing space for Puck to run around in and use to give different speeches and watch the lovers walk through the forest. And now, lighting wise, I found these 3 photos of sort of the woods in the morning with the sun glowing through the trees, and I really love this image of the light coming through the trees, and I thought this would be a beautiful way to show how time passes throughout the show, because there are times when they fall asleep and then wake up. So having set trees kind of set like this, and then putting stage lights behind them to give the soft glow of the sun rising in the morning, I thought it would be really beautiful. And then I saw this picture and I thought of the morning mist, so I thought that maybe there could be some form of small fog machine that just slowly trickles out fog when it's morning time for the characters. This could also be used when we're more focused on the fairies so that they have a more mystical vibe going on. And then I also have this picture of a bunch of flowers. I thought that having wildflowers throughout the whole set would be a really great way to decorate it and have different things to use on stage. Either someone can pick flowers or run through the flowers. It's just something to do for the fairies or something like that. They could be collecting flowers for potions or things like that, spells. And in my dream world, this is totally a mood board for a set that has no budget. And I would love for some of these flowers to have lights in them so that they can glow different colors at night when it's nighttime in the show. So some of them can be blues and pinks and yellows, just to give that really mystical, dreamy vibe. I'm getting more excited just thinking about it. I think if I had to explain this aesthetic in some way, I would say that this is a cottagecore dreamer vibe. My main goal with this mood board was to create something that really says full forest for dreaming. I think that would be a great way to explain it as well. I hope you all enjoyed listening to me talk about why I chose certain things and what my vision would be for this show. I think it would look really beautiful if it came to life, and I would love the opportunity to make it happen. But again, this was definitely me imagining that my budget was endless. So I hope you all enjoyed my video for this week, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye!
For this week's project, I chose to create my mood board / collage for the musical Hairspray. My concept for this design is recreating to the best of our abilities a space that feels like you were in the early 60s. I want to start by utilizing the color palette that has both bright colors and neutrals to give it some balance. To start off, for the costumes, I would like to keep the teenagers in the bright colors to highlight their energy and youthfulness. As for the adults, I would like to keep them in neutrals or in muted versions of the bright colors. I also want to use shape in the costume design, so I want to put the girls in a larger A-line skirt, and for the adults, especially for Velma Von Tussle, in a fitted skirt. As for the men, a suit or a dress shirt and trouser combo in coordinating colors will do. For a contrast and texture, I would like to put the Dynamites in sequins, based directly off of an image of the Supremes. For the set, I would like the Corny Collins show to be very bright, using the bright colors from the palette along with contrasting black and white. I also want to use shapes and patterns to give it some visual dimension. For Tracy and Penny's homes, I want to use more muted colors. I also want to bring in some texture with the furniture and window treatments. And then going back to the Corny Collins show, I think a really cool prop would be recreating or even refurbishing an old TV camera. And for lighting, I would like the Corny Collins show to be lit just like a TV set, with harsher bright lights, and maybe some fun gobo effects and colored gels to create more interest. For Tracy and Penny's homes, I want it to look like they are lit by lamps, and I want the overall appearance to be a lot softer. But I think that is everything in my collage / design, but I hope I have conveyed a sense of early 60s atmosphere.
Hi everyone, I'm Maddie Boshin, and for this week's production design mood board, I focused on the musical The Fantastics. The show's script calls for a simple platform, a small cast, limited props, and a cardboard moon. The costumes are instructed to be theatrical, but not too theatrical, and the actors are directed to never actually leave the stage. All of these strange production choices help to remind the audience that the reality created in the show is not one of real life, but more of one that's able to mirror real life, creating a dreamlike world which I wanted to show in this mood board. A lot of characters in the show use the power of suggestion to clearly illustrate the scenes for the audience in a way that doesn't require a literal wall or garden in front of them. Instead, it's more important that the show creates the right moods, especially through lighting. To me, there should be a clear separation between the vibrant worlds that El Gallo creates and the quote-unquote reality that Louisa and Matt live in. El Gallo reminds me of a ringmaster or a magician. He is someone who seeks to create the show seemingly out of nothing, So I love the energy that these carnival scenes bring. I think that there's also a warmth and energy that I really love about them. I'd also love to see some sort of starry sky motif, especially one that could surround the audience and make them feel like they were in some sort of a magical vacuum of a space, where things can just be invented out of thin air. While I see El Gallo as a kind of mysterious magician or illusionist, I see Louisa and Matt as this sort of idealized high school couple. I can really clearly see Louisa in a 1950s prom dress. I think this would really emphasize her innocence and over-the-topness. Overall, I really want to see this potential production as a dreamy void of a space where things and people seem to appear and disappear as El Gallo calls onto them.
It's nice to remember, although you know the snow will follow. Deep in December, it's nice to remember without a hurt.
Welcome to the Renaissance. Hi everybody, and welcome to my design and production mood board collage. This is going to be a presentation of all the different ideas that I would have if I was designing a production of Something Rotten. Enjoy. So the story of Something Rotten follows the Bottom brothers, Nick and Nigel, who are struggling to compete in theater against William Shakespeare. So I decided to take a further look at that in terms of costuming, different color schemes, and scenic elements for my design board. When it comes to the costumes for the show, the men would all be in, old Elizabethan English garments, and the women would all have their long dresses. The men with, puffy coats and puffy pants, and frilly collars around their necks. Another thing that's very heavy in terms of ideas in the show is the fact that this is the English Renaissance at the end of the 1500s. So you have prominent writers such as William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and Ben Jonson all coming into play in terms of the writing and literature in the world. So for the most part on this set, in terms of buildings, I would be looking at making Tudor houses with, the wooden framing, tall chimneys, big roof, also known as a thatched roof in this case. One of the fun things about the show Something Rotten is that it pokes fun at a lot of musical theater history in terms of shows and also Shakespeare's work. So in terms of the influences for the character of Nick Bottom and his theater troupe versus William Shakespeare, you get this idea of all the men who are in Nick and Nigel's troupe come out of the players from A Midsummer Night's Dream by William Shakespeare, such as Peter Quince, Francis Flute, Tom Snout, Snug, and Robin Starveling. They all help to make up Nick and Nigel Bottom's acting troupe. So I wanted to talk about my color ideas for this show. In terms of costuming, there's a wide variety of costumes in this show. I mean, at some point towards the end of the show, every person on stage comes out as an egg yolk. So for Shakespeare's guys and the Puritans, they could all be in, darker colors. And in terms of Nick and Nigel Bottom, Nick specifically, you see more of, the blue scheme. Nigel has more earthy tones with the lighter colors. And then when they do the number, it's a musical. It's a big, glitzy number. So, bright colors, super flashy.
Hello, Melly here to talk a little bit about my mood board for the ballet, The Nutcracker. I chose for this project to actually do 2 mood boards. The reason is because the show is split into 2 very different worlds with different aesthetics. My original plan was to split the collage down the center to show the contrast of the looks, but I had some technical difficulties. The first board that I did was for the Stahlbaum family home. This house is where we start our journey, and one wouldn't be disappointed by the grandeur of the home. The story is set in 19th century Germany on Christmas Eve, and the Stahlbaum family is hosting an impressive party for their family and friends. With this board, I was hopeful that I could capture the elegance of the house and party, and the spirit of the festivities. There is a lot of love and joy felt within this house, and almost an air of everyday magic. I chose a lot of dark woods, reds, and gold leaf for the colors. I find these color combinations to look classy. It was important to me to also take inspiration from some German holiday traditions. Some include Advent wreaths, mulled wine, and an ornately decorated Christmas tree, which ideally would be decorated with ripe red apples, gingerbread, and silk flowers to create the illusion of a tree blooming in the midst of winter. I also did a little bit of Googling and found out that in German folklore, nutcrackers bring good luck to your family and protect your home. They represent power and strength, and they have the capability to keep your family safe. The picture of the girl in pink is representative of Clara Stahlbaum, the story's young protagonist. While Clara feels at home in her house, it was important to me that her color scheme be very different from the color scheme of the house. This is just the world that Clara finds herself in, and not the world she creates in her dreams. So I wanted to make a clear contrast between Clara's soft pink aesthetics to the home's red and golds. The second board that I created was for the Land of the Sweets. The Land of the Sweets is far less concrete in its perimeters, and the characters travel through different parts of the land. The main places we encounter is the snow-covered forest, the candy palace, and the garden. You will see that there are some pictures of snow costumes or flower costumes. These are in here because the main sources of storytelling is music and dance. Those elements of the story in particular are told through ballet, so I thought it was important to represent those ideas with clothing as well as inspiration images. The top left corner is inspiration for the snow, then in the top right corner there's inspiration for the candy palace. In the bottom left corner there's inspiration for the garden, and finally in the bottom right corner there's inspiration for the sugar plum fairy. The magic or whimsy of the land is similar to a sweet dream that you don't want to wake up from. It is comfortable, soft, and imaginative. It's a place that is exciting and engaging, but a sense of danger is not present. I tried to use pastels to represent the soft, comfortable feeling, and I also tried to pull images for the snow, flowers, and candy to show the graceful and magical nature of the land. Because this land is actually Clara's dream, I was inspired by theming the mood of the world off of Clara's personality in mind. I tried to make the look of this mood board embody Clara's spirit.
Hi everyone. So this week's project was creating a mood board for a play or a musical, and I had decided to do Into the Woods. The overall tone that I wanted to have was sort of a romantic one. I really love the romantic period, particularly the way they depicted medieval life, because medieval times weren't exactly the greatest, but the art that they did of medieval times is just gorgeous. And I think what the Romantic period does really successfully is sort of immortalize time. Like, time is a huge part of that art movement, and it's also a huge part of Into the Woods. Like, the clever thing about this show is how it crosses stories that otherwise would have never crossed paths in the first place. Like, time is of the essence for these characters. The baker and his wife only have until the full moon to collect these items. Cinderella only has until midnight to enjoy herself at the ball. Rapunzel has all the time in the world to herself but wants freedom. And I feel like a timeless romanticism would really fit this show beautifully. When coming up with a concept, I really like to do mind maps because it really helps me get my ideas out and gives me the space to sort of explore, find every avenue and direction I could go. At one point I was thinking about like retrofuturism and the Cold War, but also haute couture and designs inspired by Alexander McQueen. But I decided that none of them really fit every category that I had come up with to describe the show, as much as romanticism and the romanticism of time did. So then I moved on to Pinterest, and as you can see, I started off with a very naturalistic view of it all, with lots of landscapes and different climates and biomes, but later moved on into romantic paintings, and you can slowly see where my color palette changed to these soft roses and blues and pastels and earth tones. And basically what I did to sort of tie it all together is to put a filter overlay and made some final adjustments to the photos to really add the final touches, and voila! Here's my Into the Woods mood board.
Don't be careful, don't be clever, when you see your wish pursue. It's a dangerous endeavor, but the only thing to do. Though it's beautiful, though it's deep, though it's dark, and though you may lose the path where you may come to woes. You mustn't stop, you mustn't swerve, you mustn't swerve. Skip those opportunities, you make sure the walls, you mustn't swerve. You can't just wish to get your wish. You know, into the woods where nothing's clear, where witches, ghosts, and wolves appear. Into the woods and through the fear, you have to take the journey. Into the woods and down the dell, it may perhaps, but who can tell? Into the woods to live the spell. Into the woods to lose the boogie. Into the woods to have the trial. To win the prince. To get the money. To save the home. To kill the wolf. To find the father.
Hi everyone, my name is Thomas J. Charles, and this week I created a mood board for the musical Evita by Andrew Lloyd Webber. So in doing this, I decided to start with the set because I wanted to establish the environment that my characters were going to be in before I designed their costumes. So I was reading through the script, and there's a line in the song The Art of the Possible that talks about how politics is the art of the possible and anything can happen in politics. And that got me thinking, you know, just with our political climate right now in our country, and the big themes of the show and what this show is about, it really got me thinking about how politics and theater really aren't all that different. So I decided to take this theme of politics as performance art and have that be the theme for my production and for my design. So that influenced the set because I knew that I had to have the Casa Rosada in the background. I knew that, you know, that's so important to who these characters are that I needed to include that. So I chose an image that has the main steps coming down, and I really wanted to incorporate that in. And I knew that I wanted to sort of have the staircase sort of building up Ava's journey to the Casa Rosada, but it also reminded me a little bit of a debate stage, because those tend to be stepped or raked. So I would want to have a series of steps with a large platform about 3 steps up, which would be a debate stage. And most of the action of the first act would take place on that stage, with characters at debate podiums going back and forth. And I think there could be some really interesting moments, like when Magaldi and Ava are at each other's throats, or when Ava is trying to woo Juan. I think there could be some really cool moments there at those podiums. I also put some presidential artwork in there. Obama's Hope campaign poster is on the board because I liked the idea of, as candidates in a campaign, or in a presidential race, like, come and go, you see their posters and then they fade into the background. The idea of having a poster in specifically that style of artwork, for each of these characters as they sort of come into prominence, I think would be really, really cool. On the back wall, so sort of like by the doors of the Casa Rosada, sort of playing with what's the inside and what's the outside of the presidential palace, with those campaign posters being replaced with Ava and Juan's presidential portrait at the very end. And I didn't put a picture of their actual portrait. I decided instead to put Eisenhower and Truman's portraits on there. I liked the composition. I liked how both of them felt professional but friendly, and I really liked also that Truman's was a little bit of the White House on the bottom right hand corner of his portrait, and I thought that was a really nice detail. It wasn't just plain background. Finally, I decided that because of who the Perones were getting a lot of their support from, I did a little bit of research, and I actually asked a couple of my friends that live in Argentina, you know, how the country felt about the Perones. Because of the people that they were appealing to, I decided that working class, I thought it would be really an interesting physical manifestation of these people if the whole thing was scaffolding. So creating things that are recognizable silhouettes, so clearly creating the Casa Rosada, but representing the people that are voting for the Perones, while also just making it a little bit more visually interesting. I think it also plays into how Juan and Ava really created this new... Peronism was a very radical shift in Argentine politics, and it's still something today that is very controversial. I think building this sort of rickety structure that's not quite done and sort of represents buildings in progress is really representative of their government as a whole. Finally, I included some images for Che Guevara down at the very bottom of the board because of when we meet him in the plot of the story. He is the first major character that we meet right at the top of the show. There's also a clear separation between, like, in terms of status, although he and Ava would not have really been contemporaries, they were in power at the same time. But there was no real connection between them. But in the show, there is this separation. There's almost an omniscience that Che has, which is why I wanted to include some images of deities. There are 3 Hindu deities at the very bottom, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, and they are the creator, the protector, and the destroyer. And I just thought, in the research that I was doing about Che Guevara, I thought that really encapsulated everything that he was. You know, creating and babying this new regime that he was creating in Cuba, but causing so much destruction in the meantime. So I really liked that idea for him. And then I also included a Christian God, because of course the religion of Argentina. I thought that was important. And there's also the way that Christians view their God, as someone that they are one with and are truly all-knowing and omnipresent, whereas some religions see their deities. I also included images of the current White House press secretary as well as 2 Fox News analysts. I did that because I think that the role that Shay plays in the show sort of falls somewhere between the two. I was initially just going to put some press secretary images on there, but then I was finding images and the analysts popped up and I was like, oh, that's a really interesting idea. I think his role does fall somewhere between the two of simply reporting what's going on, but he does have very much his own opinion. And just to tie him into this whole politics, this performance art kind of thing, you know, the debates that the press secretaries get into and just what we see on the news, I think all encapsulates how politics is theater, and how the two really can go hand in hand to make a really interesting concept for a production, especially one like this that is so politically driven anyway.
One has no rules, is not precise. One rarely acts the same way twice. One spurns no device, practicing the art of the possible. One always picks the easy fight. One praises fools, one's father's light. One shifts left to right.
Hi, my name is Valerie Simmons, and this week we were doing a mood board project. For this week, I chose to work with the show, The Drowsy Chaperone, as if it was being created into a film or just pretty much a mood board for the story. So what I created was this board of kind of like vintage photos mixed with how a room would feel, because we are going from 2 time periods pretty much, from going from the main home where the man in the chair is just being his person and falling in love and telling us about how much he loves this musical, to going into that world and being in this spectacle, funny world that we all really never expected to be in. I think one thing I really took away from this show is the transitions and the transformation within people and the way they think and the way they feel is a really big thing for me, which honestly made it this really large circle in a way, because if you think about it, the man in the chair, he starts the show being like, oh, like, I want to show you my favorite show, and he kind of seems like he's in one of those states where he's down, and he brings out his favorite show to show people that he can be fun, he can be happy, and he brings that to life in this show, brings that out of him. So we also see in the show that we go through a transition with the main characters about the chaperone and how she helps change people and make them understand what they want to go through. So we kind of start in this, like, I'm looking at it right now, I can flip it around. But like when looking at it, we kind of start here. If you see at top, I put strings all the way around to like show the circle. There's images as well. And we kind of start with this picture of a room. When I imagine the story, I imagine it happening when the sun is setting. It's starting to set, it's getting a little cold, but also still warm, because we're getting that feeling of the invitement and the excitement of this show. And then we move into that sad moment of we don't know, like, where we want to go, and she's dressed in 1920s attire, sitting there with a drink. And then as we go along, we see in this circle that I've created the lights from New York City, and her, like,
the girl in this dress that's kind of old Hollywood and the big 1920s party, and it's kind of that showing of like what life does she want to live now. Like she's so dramatic and over the top. And then as the story goes along, we have the ribbons at the top, ribbons, I call strings, that the best man tied on his finger. So I have them in 3 places, but these are for the show where those 3 spots hit, in my opinion. Is the beginning of the show when the sun sets, the middle of the show where they find that resolution and they finally get married, and at the end when the sun's coming back up, and just because he watched this musical, listened to it again, he feels as though his day is rising and he's ready for the next day. So in this show, there's a lot of things that come out about the man in the chair's past life and how this story really represents and takes place for his life. So those transitions of the metaphorical for him and what it means for the actual other story is really beyond words. I found these images of, it was a painting done, and it went from green to gold to blue, which I thought was a really, really great way to describe the show through color, starting with the green, sort of the envious sort of side of things, and then moving into that gold, which is the glitz, the glamour, the high energy, the happiness, and then moving into that blue, which is that soft, calming feeling. And that goes really along with the girl sitting on the bench, and how soft she is and how she's just kind of sitting there and she's calm at this point, because this whole story brings the man in the chair back to his calm. Even though the story might be over, he can listen to it whenever he wants, which is his beautiful thing, and he can imagine it any way inside of his head, which is something you really have to remember, because this is almost a dream in a way. He's never seen it and he's making it up in his head, so it's coming from his home, his cozy place, to this extravagant, beautiful, everything he's ever wanted, all the way back to his happiness, his calm at the end.
BackStage is part of our larger programming, Digital Clock. Digital Clock is made possible by a generous gift from Phil and Liz Gross. If you'd like to learn more about our programming or how you can become a supporter, visit us at collegelightoperacompany.com. Tune in again next week for another installment of BackStage.